Hello, I am Enrique Páez. I am a Spanish writer. I live in Spain, and I have been invited to participate in this Congress of Children and Youth Literature in Malaysia, thanks to Reza and Alima, who invited me to participate. As a writer, I'm dedicated to writing. There are about 30 books that I have published, of which about 1 million books have already been sold. In that sense, it could be said that I'm a bestseller. And I'm aware that that happens to few writers. In addition to writing, I have spent years teaching creative writing classes. I have taught at the Madrid Writing Workshop for 30 years, and currently at the Writers' School, also in Madrid, although at a distance due to the coronavirus. During the trips, I read a lot too. I read in Spanish and in English, which allows me to read books that are not translated into my language, but into English. And I must add that I am in love with Malaysia. I have traveled there multiple times. The first was 15 years ago, and the last just a year ago, before the start of the coronavirus pandemic. The pandemic has changed our lives, or at least the way we see life. When the pandemic started in China, I was traveling with my wife through Malaysia, your country. We have traveled to Malaysia many times. Last time, 15 months ago, we were in the island of Langkawi and Penang and Putrajaya. We loved your country. And the food, ikan bakar, laksa soup, nasi lemak. My wife and I love to go to Kuala Lumpur and Pankor Island and visit all our dear Malaysian friends. Without a doubt, Malaysia would be one of the countries where we would go to live for the rest of our lives. Last year, from Malaysia, we traveled to Australia and New Zealand, and that time the pandemic was getting worse in China, and my family wrote a WhatsApp to me from Spain, worried that the pandemic would spread to Europe. I laughed then. From New Zealand, we flew to Myanmar and toured the country from north to south. We especially liked the Kutodao Paya Temple, with the largest book in the world, in Mandalay. We traveled for a day along the Irrawaddy River until we reached the city of 1,000 temples in Bagan, which we traveled by motorcycle on dusty roads. We paint our faces with yellow, with Tanaka, to protect ourselves from the sun. I like to travel. In my travels, I collect a lot of experience and stories that I later incorporate into my books. In Myanmar, for example, I bought a longi, a skirt that men wear made of cotton and silk. Mine was blue. It was the first time I dressed in a skirt. It seemed comfortable and fresh to withstand the sticky heat of Myanmar. I liked it so much that I keep wearing it at home in Spain. I'm sure at some point it will give one of my male characters a longi. I always carry my e-reader with me, in which I keep more than 1,000 books. With that, I know that I will always have something to read. Every good writer is a good reader. Returning to the travel on the pandemic, from Myanmar we traveled to Cambodia and then to Vietnam. Our last destination was to be Beijing, where I would celebrate my birthday before going back to Spain and starting to write with all the experiences collected from the trip. But this last destination was not possible. I was unable to see the Forbidden City of the Chinese Wall. They cancelled our flights and closed the Chinese border. And here we began a nightmare return journey, and the confinement began. On my return to Spain, I was blocked with writing. But then, some months after that, I signed up for an online project, NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, to write a novel in a month. And so, with the support and motivation of thousands of writers from around the world who began to write at the same time, I finished my last novel, Memories of My Shadow. I have the feeling that this pandemic has changed the world we have known until now. And that doesn't have to be bad news either. It can also be positive. During the pandemic, I have been able to continue giving my creative writing classes through Zoom. And this time, people who lived in Mexico, the United States, Argentina, and France have been able to join my classes. If it hadn't been for Zoom, it would have been impossible for them to attend my classes. The pandemic has also brought increased consumption of social networks. My YouTube channel had many more views now. On my channel, there are videos with tips for writing. Maybe they can be of help for you too. They are in Spanish, but with English subtitles. As the pandemic progressed, the number of people who began to write stories, novels, and poetry increased. My editor told me that they received dozens of new manuscripts every week. The pandemic has triggered creativity. YouTube channels have also increased, and people uploading videos to Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram. I think we have to rely on social networks to share our experiences and knowledge. Thanks to social networks such as WhatsApp, I communicate with friends of mine from different countries. There are some terrible stories. A week ago, my friend Helos from Mexico told me the following story on WhatsApp. It was 12 at night in León, Guanajuato. The city has been covered in a thick gray-white haze that smelled of shore gas. My friend's house was filled with that smell and smoke. They coughed so much that they had to close all the doors and windows and turn off the air conditioning. They could not sleep well. The next morning, all the neighbors were talking about the same thing, about the strange haze with the strange smell that had flooded their houses. Later, the mystery of that mist was revealed. That night, there were so many deaths that accumulated in the 4 funeral homes in the city that they did not stop cremating them all night. The stories during COVID are more varied. My friend Alicia Barberis, an Argentine writer, was in northern Colombia when they closed the airspace in Latin America. They picked up all the Argentina trapped in the country on buses and took them to the airport. On the way, they stunned the bus as if they were the cause of the spread of the pandemic. And despite everyone being locked up in their homes for longer, no more books have been sold. Perhaps the reading medium is no longer so much paper, but digital. And therein lies the secret of the drop in sales of the physical book. That is why I believe that adapting to the digital format without abandoning the physical books is the future. For example, my book Writing, a manual of narrative techniques used in universities in Spain and America, is in its 10th edition and 30,000 copies have been sold. However, my advice video that also appeared in the book have been viewed 2 million times. What is more popular? I think the answer is clear, and that is different now than it was just 5 years ago. Another example, my wife, Beatriz Montero, has a YouTube channel. It is the most visited storytelling channel in the world, and it has more than 110 million visits. 110 million visits. On the channel, she tells stories published by different publishers, and the publishers themselves sent her the books so she can tell them on the channel. Among other stories, she tells those published by me. Each of these videos has been seen more than 100 times more than the sales of the book on paper. If publishing something is making it public, where is it published more? On YouTube or on paper? The data is overwhelming. Despite the confinement, there are also forms and possibilities of collaboration between different authors, actors, storytellers, and illustrators around the world, thanks to the final impulse that the internet has taken. That is another element that has been enhanced through the period of confinement. I, for example, now I'm writing a book with a Colombian illustrator friend, Alecos, and we are doing it at four hands and at a distance. He's illustrating in Bogota, in Colombia, and I am in Spain. And we connect through Skype or WhatsApp or Zoom, and we are advancing in the work as we did 20 years ago with another book that was published at that time, and that was entitled Renata and the Pinton Magician. This time it is a process that is underway, and the distance does not prevent us from being able to work together again, despite the fact that we are almost 10,000 miles apart from each other. Writing is a way of survival. It is a way of relaunching life. As a writer, I can also say that last November I started writing with more than 50,000 other writers from around the world during National Novel Writing Month, what has happened every November for many years. But this past year has been especially busy with record numbers of online participants due to the pandemic and the confinement. That has allowed me to write 75,000-word novel that reflects exactly what life in a pandemic is. Writing, in some ways, is always to survive, but even more in this time where we are condemned to be locked up. But we can easily turn that condemnation into an opportunity to justly open ourselves to the outside world through the internet and social networks, and at the same time delve into ourselves with an intimate and personal writing, because we have more time and almost obligation to be locked up. I believe that the closure of the coronavirus is not only a sad legacy, a disgrace. We must also see it as one of the best benefits that it will be able to get for the future, and that is the greater capacity for connection between people who are very far apart, as I am doing at this moment with all of you, communicating with all those who participate in this Congress of Children's and Young People Literature in Malaysia, and at the same time delving into the essence of the human being, of childhood, adolescence, youth, maturity, and old age, which give us this combination, this opportunity to survive through writing. In spite of Baudelaire's dictum, genius is childhood recovered, children's literature has been labeled sub-literature for much of the critics, and this curse sometimes accompanying women's literature, detective stories, erotic tales, science fictions, wild westerns, and novelettes. The very fact that there is a lot of bad literature in these paragraphs does not justify the overall assessment, because bad literature abounds in all genres, themes, and countries. When a literary text is good, it's also good if it belongs to children's literature or metaphysics. The sake of explanation, paternalism, and protectionism made much of the classic children's literature to be dogmatized from its origins. But good authors, Roald Dahl, Gianni Rodari, Christine Nostlinger, Michael Ende, and others, never fell into that trap. The authors considered classic of children's literature Verne, Stevenson, Dickens, Carroll, Salgari wrote their stories and adventure novels aimed to all audiences, not just for children and youth. Only from the second half of the 20th century, children's literature authors write fully aware that its readers are children. Lately, there is a renewal of children's literature in the form of normal and everyday storytelling, like those that may be leaving any of the readers. Children's stories are not composed of fairies, princes, and stepmothers. Children, although others seem to forget sometimes, are living in the real world where there are discussions, games, penalty, awards, injustice, friends, illness, anger, and reconciliations. It is similar to the adult world, yes, but the things that interest them and the conflicts that affect them are quite different. In fact, the construction roles on creative writing are always the same. We must see the world through the characters' eyes, and if the characters are children, we might see the world through their eyes and not through the eyes of the adult writer. The codes are different, as are those of a pregnant woman, an undocumented immigrant, a cancer patient, or a lover. But if the writer should be in the shoes of the characters in his stories, looking at the world through its eyes and breathe with the lungs, when you come into children's literature, you might do the same. To mimic the characters, not watch them from atop a platform. Indeed, the language of children's literature should be appropriate to the age of the readers, which coincides almost always with the age of the protagonist to facilitate the identification process. Another thing different is the treatment, not because it needs to be done from a paternalistic, but it needs to be addressed from within the child. If you cannot become a child, do not write stories for children. So, in summary, there are my last recommendations for writers who want to write children's and youth literature. First, to write a story that children can truly enjoy, go back to childhood and write from there. Try to remember what matters to you and how you value things. Second, the narration can be realistic and deal with any everyday topic, or fantastic, magical, imaginative, funny, but not abstract, symbolic, pedagogical. Third, the point of view and the way of seeing reality must be those of child or adolescent within you, without forgetting the age of your readers. Children and young people simply have another logic that in many cases is more correct and reasonable than that of adults. Fourth, the fact that the protagonist of a story is a child does not automatically turn into a children's story. Children do not eat stories. They are sincere and expect that the same sincerity is in your story. Fifth, flee from cliches. Children want to dream and believe in the possibility of a better world. So, it is your time for writing. Write a children's story, but make sure it is neither patronizing, corny, and treat. Look at the world with the eyes of a child. Don't try to educate, advise, or indoctrinate the reader. Just tell him or her a story. And remember that all the valid tips for writing a good adult story, they are also valid for a children's one. And that's the end of my conference. I hope you are happy and safe and sound for the rest of your lives. A big hug from Spain for your friend, Enrique Páez.